At exactly 2:17 a.m., every heart monitor in the west wing of St. Matthew's General stopped beeping at the same time. Not flatlined, just silent, as if something had reached out and pressed mute on an entire hospital floor. The night nurse on duty later said the silence felt intentional, like the building itself was holding its breath. Doctors would later insist it was a systems error. They never explained why the security cameras recorded something walking through the ward during that silence. St. Matthew's General sat just outside a rusting Midwestern town, the kind of place where the population shrank every year and the hospital remained the only building still lit at night. It had been built in the late 1960s, expanded in layers rather than redesigned, resulting in a confusing maze of corridors, half-forgotten wings, and sealed-off wards that newer staff rarely entered. The West Wing, Ward C3, was one of those places. Officially, it housed long-term cardiac patients and overflow cases when the ER became overwhelmed. Unofficially, staff avoided it whenever possible, especially during night shifts. Not because of ghosts, at least not openly, but because of patterns. Patients in C3 rang call buttons at the same times each night. For alarms malfunctioned only between 2 and 3 a.m. Medication carts left unattended were sometimes found moved, perfectly aligned against walls where no one remembered placing them. Doctors dismissed these as coincidences. Nurses didn't. Emily Hargrove had been a night shift nurse for 6 years, long enough to trust routine over reassurance. She had learned that hospitals sounded different at night. The hum of fluorescent lights became louder, footsteps echoed longer, and the air itself felt heavier, as though saturated with pain that had nowhere to go. On her first week assigned to Ward C3, a senior nurse pulled her aside and told her quietly, "If you hear breathing where no one is sleeping, don't answer it." Emily laughed then. She didn't laugh later. The patients in C3 were stable that night. No codes, no emergencies, just the usual low chorus of machines and the faint smell of antiseptic mixed with something older, dust and metal and time. At 2:16 a.m., Emily was charting vitals at the nurse's station when the temperature dropped. Not dramatically, not enough to trigger alarms, just enough for her breath to fog faintly in the air. Then the monitors went silent. Every screen froze. Every beep died. The sudden absence of sound felt violent, like pressure popping in her ears. Emily stood, heart hammering, instinct screaming that this was wrong in a way technical failures never were. She checked the main console. Power was still running. Backup generators hadn't kicked in. The system simply stopped communicating. That was when she heard footsteps. Slow. Bora. Vet. They came from the far end of the ward, the sealed rooms. Emily radioed security. Static answered. She tried the intercom. Nothing. Her phone showed full signal but refused to place calls, the screen dimming as if her thumb wasn't touching it at all. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied now by something else, a sound like someone struggling to breathe through fluid-filled lungs. Emily moved toward the patient rooms, checking for emergencies, telling herself this was stress, fatigue, imagination. Room C317's door was open. It hadn't been before. Inside, the patient lay awake, eyes wide, staring at the doorway behind Emily. His lips trembled as he whispered, "It's back." Before she could ask what he meant, the lights flickered, not off, but dimmer, and something passed across the glass of the door behind her. Not a shadow, a shape. Tall, too tall, its outline bent wrong, shoulders sloping unevenly, head tilted as if broken and never set properly. The glass frosted over where it stood, breath blooming across the surface from the outside of the room. Emily felt a hand brush the back of her neck. It was cold, numbingly so, and impossibly gentle, like a practiced touch. She didn't turn around. The patient began screaming. The monitors erupted back to life all at once, alarms screaming in layered chaos. The sudden noise shattered the silence like glass breaking underwater. Emily spun around, adrenaline overriding fear, but the hallway was empty. No footsteps, no frost, no shape. Security arrived minutes later, insisting nothing unusual had occurred. Camera footage showed only static between 2:16 and 2:18 a.m. No figures, no movement, just distortion that technicians blamed on electromagnetic interference. But 3 patients in Ward C, 3 coded within the hour. All survived. All reported the same thing independently. Someone had stood at the foot of their beds, watching. Someone who smelled like antiseptic and old blood. Someone who breathed but did not live. Doctors chalked it up to shared anxiety and suggestion. They always did. Emily transferred wards the next morning. She never worked nights again. Years later, she learned the truth buried in hospital archives. Ward C, 3 had once been a surgical recovery unit during the hospital's early years. A fire had broken out overnight, trapping patients sedated and unable to escape. The official report listed 6 deaths. Maintenance records hinted at more. Unaccounted for beds. Missing charts. A sealed wing. Emily still wakes at 2:17 a.m. sometimes, heart racing, ears straining for a silence that feels too deliberate to be empty. She knows better now. Some wards never sleep. If this story gave you chills, like the video, comment, and subscribe so you could get videos like this regularly. The patient chart appeared at 1:42 a.m. Already signed, already stamped, already approved. No one remembered admitting him. No ambulance log listed his arrival. Yet his name appeared on every system in the hospital as if he had always been there. By morning, every staff member who interacted with him wished the chart had never existed. Mercy Valley Medical Center sat on the outskirts of a desert city in the American Southwest, surrounded by scrubland and long, empty highways where headlights felt like the only proof of movement in the world. Night shifts there were quiet to the point of discomfort, the kind of quiet that made even experienced nurses hyper-aware of their own breathing. Dr. Alan Mercer had worked graveyard shifts for over a decade. He trusted systems more than instincts and documentation more than memory. That was why the patient unsettled him immediately. Room 214 had been empty at the start of the shift. Dr. Mercer knew this because he had personally signed off on the census sheet at midnight. Yet at 1:42 a.m., the electronic board updated on its own. 214, male, mid-50s, unknown trauma, observation. No photo, no intake notes, no triage details. Just a name that flickered briefly before stabilizing. John Doe. Dr. Mercer assumed the ER had admitted someone without notifying him. An annoyance, but not unheard of. He grabbed the chart, already populated with vitals that looked too perfect to be real, and headed down the hallway. The lights dimmed slightly as he approached room 214, not flickering but softening, as though the hospital itself were reluctant to illuminate what waited inside. The patient sat upright on the bed, not reclined, not resting, sitting perfectly straight, hands folded, eyes open. He was pale in a way that suggested long-term absence from sunlight, skin stretched thin over sharp features. His hospital gown was spotless, untouched by blood or sweat. The monitor beside him displayed a steady heart rate, calm and unbothered. "Sir," Dr. Mercer said, forcing professional calm into his voice. "Can you tell me what brought you in tonight?" The man turned his head slowly, movements deliberate and economical, like someone conserving energy for a reason they hadn't yet revealed. "I didn't come in," the patient said. His voice was dry and used like paper dragged across concrete. Dr. Mercer smiled reflexively. That's not what your chart says. The man's eyes shifted toward the screen, and for a moment, something like confusion crossed his face. Then, recognition. "Oh," he said quietly. "It followed me." The temperature in the room dropped enough for Dr. Mercer to notice. He glanced at the thermostat. "Normal." He asked routine questions, but the patient answered only some, ignoring others entirely, as if responding to a different conversation happening just beneath the surface. Every time Dr. Mercer tried to leave, the patient spoke again, gently, insistently, pulling him back. "You shouldn't be alone at night," the man said at one point. "It prefers that." By 2:30 a.m., nurses reported strange system glitches. Other empty rooms briefly populated themselves on the board before clearing. Call lights activated with no patient present. The hospital's auto doors opened and closed repeatedly, responding to nothing. And always, room 214 remained occupied. At 3:08 a.m., a nurse finally asked the question no one wanted a voice. "Doctor," who admitted him? Security footage showed no one entering room 214 all night. No patient, no staff escort, no wheelchair. The bed camera, however, showed the patient sitting there from the moment the footage began, already present when the recording started, as if he had always been part of the room. Dr. Mercer returned, pulse pounding now, professionalism cracking under something closer to dread. The patient looked different. Thinner, hollowed, as though something had been feeding on his presence. "It's closer now," the patient said without looking up. "You let it notice me." The monitors spiked. Heart rate surged, then flatlined. Not in panic, but in surrender. Alarms blared. Nurses rushed in. Dr. Mercer reached the bedside, hands moving automatically, training overriding terror. The patient grabbed his wrist. The grip was impossibly strong, fingers cold and rigid, eyes suddenly sharp with clarity. "It doesn't want me," the man whispered. "It wants the place that took me in." The lights went out. Not emergency power, not partial failure, total darkness. In that darkness, something moved. Not between rooms, but through them, a pressure that made walls groan and floors vibrate. Staff later described the sensation as being watched from inside their own bodies. When the lights returned seconds later, room 214 was empty. No patient, no chart, no bed record, just a single handprint burned into the mattress, fingers elongated, pressed far deeper than human weight could allow. Hospital administration declared a system error. They always did. The night was written off, scrubbed from logs, overwritten by normalcy. But Dr. Mercer resigned 2 weeks later after discovering something buried in archived county records. A man matching the patient's description had died decades earlier during a mass casualty incident at the same hospital. A night when the ER overflowed and patients were placed in rooms without proper admission, names replaced by placeholders that never became identities. John Doe was one of them. The hospital never admitted fault. Room 214 remains sealed. Some nights, the board still flickers. A name still appears. And somewhere in the building, something waits to be let in again. If this story gave you chills, like the video, comment, and subscribe so you could get videos like this regularly. The call button in room 407 rang every night at exactly 3:11 a.m. The problem was that room 407 had been empty for over a year. No bed, no patient, no power routed to that wall. Yet the red light at the nurse's station blinked on, patiently, as if someone inside was waiting to be answered. Ridgeway Memorial Hospital overlooked a river in the northeastern United States, its upper floors looming above the fog like a concrete cliff. The building was old enough that parts of it had been renovated repeatedly, patched and repurposed until entire sections no longer matched modern blueprints. Room 407 sat at the end of one such section, a former isolation room closed after a severe infection outbreak years earlier. Officially, it was stripped and decommissioned. Unofficially, no one ever felt comfortable near it. Linda Carver had worked night shifts there for nearly 20 years. She trusted patterns more than superstition, and patterns were exactly what made room 407 impossible to ignore. Every night at 3:11 a.m., the call light activated. Maintenance replaced wiring. IT checked the system. Engineers swore the circuit had been disconnected entirely. Still, the light rang. At first, nurses silenced it remotely. But after a while, the button began reactivating itself moments later, blinking insistently, demanding presence. Linda remembered the first time she answered it. The hallway beyond the nurse's station felt longer than usual as she walked, shadows pooling unnaturally in corners. The air grew colder with each step, heavy with a faint smell of iron and antiseptic. Room 407's door was ajar. Inside, the room was empty, bare concrete where a bed had once been bolted. The call button hung loosely from the wall, its plastic casing yellowed with age. As Linda stood there, the button depressed slowly on its own. The sound echoed far too loudly in the silent room. Her radio crackled immediately. "Nurse, can you help me?" The voice was weak, strained, and unmistakably close.
Not from the radio, but from somewhere behind her. Linda spun around. The doorway was empty. The hall beyond was dark. When she reported the incident, supervisors blamed fatigue. Still, they posted a memo instructing staff to respond physically to any calls from 407 rather than silencing them. That decision would prove to be a mistake. Over the following weeks, more staff heard it. A man's voice, sometimes a woman's, sometimes a child, always pleading, always urgent. Vitals monitors in nearby rooms spiked when the call button rang. Patients waking in panic, insisting someone had been standing beside their beds moments earlier. Doctors dismissed it as mass suggestion. Linda noticed something else. Each time someone answered the call, that staff member requested a transfer within days, or quit, or took medical leave for reasons they couldn't fully explain. On a winter night, when the river fog pressed thick against the windows, the call button rang again at 3:11 a.m. This time, Linda was alone, short-staffed, overworked, tired enough to be angry rather than afraid. She grabbed her flashlight and walked to 407, jaw clenched, determined to end it once and for all. The door stood open wider than before. Inside, the room looked wrong. The walls were damp, stained dark, as if something had seeped through them from the inside. The temperature was freezing, breath fogging heavily now. The call button was pressed in. The voice spoke without warning. "You came back." Linda felt it then, a presence behind her, so close she could sense its posture, its expectation. She didn't turn. She already knew turning wouldn't help. The floor creaked as something shifted its weight. "They never stay," the voice continued, layered now, overlapping itself. "They always leave." Linda's flashlight flickered, illuminating the far wall for just a second, long enough to see handprints embedded in the concrete, fingers splayed in panic, some too small, some too large, pressed at impossible angles. The voice changed, becoming wet, gurgling. "I rang so they would come." The call button clicked again, and again, and again. Alarms erupted across the floor. Patients screamed. The lights surged and died. In the darkness, something moved out of room 407 and into the hallway, dragging cold with it, pulling the sound of breathing behind it like a shadow. Linda collapsed at the doorway, unable to move as the presence passed over her. Not touching, but pressing, as though testing whether she could be taken too. When the emergency lights finally snapped on, room 407 was sealed shut, doors slammed tight, called button dark. Linda was found hours later, alive but unresponsive, staring at the wall opposite the door. Linda never returned to work. She later described hearing the button in her dreams, ringing from inside her chest. Hospital records revealed the truth after a lawsuit forced partial disclosure. Room 407 had once housed overflow patients during a historic flood decades earlier. When power failed, several patients on life support were left isolated overnight. Their call buttons rang until the batteries died. No one came. The room was sealed. The button disconnected. But the pattern remained. At 3:11 a.m., the light still blinks. And somewhere inside the walls, someone is still waiting for help.